A stone giant in Egypt holds a secret that could rewrite history. The Great Sphinx of Giza, that iconic guardian of the pyramids, is officially credited to a pharaoh from 4,500 years ago. Yet its own body tells a contradictory and far more ancient tale. By the end of this journey, you will see this world-famous monument through an entirely new lens, uncovering the geological evidence that points to a forgotten epoch. We will decipher the strange erosion patterns that suggest a time when the Sahara was green, and ask whether the Sphinx's weathered form remembers a civilization lost to time. What does it mean when the rocks themselves challenge the history books? The first light of day reveals a monument of profound contradiction. Its serene, human face gazes eastward, carved with the recognizable features of a pharaoh, while its colossal leonine body stretches back into the sands, a form of immense primal power. This is the Great Sphinx, the very image of timeless Egyptian majesty. For generations, scholars have presented a clear and compelling story. They tell us the Sphinx was built by the pharaoh Khafre around 2,500 years before the Common Era, as a sacred guardian for his pyramid complex. It fits neatly into our understanding of the Old Kingdom, a period of incredible architectural ambition. This attribution, however, is not stamped on the monument itself with a builder's signature. It is a conclusion drawn from proximity, from style, and from historical context, a powerful interpretation, but one that leaves room for a quiet, persistent question. What if the stone itself is trying to tell us a different story, one written not by human hands, but by millennia of wind and water? To hear it, we must look past the familiar face and examine the forgotten body of the beast, where the real mystery is carved in deep, vertical channels. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure tell a story written in stone, a narrative far older than any pharaoh. If you stand within that vast, rectangular trench and look up at the limestone walls surrounding the statue, you will see something unexpected. The rock face is not smooth or evenly worn. Instead, it is marked by deep, vertical channels and undulating, rounded hollows that look less like the work of a sculptor's tool and more like the grooves carved by a persistent, dripping faucet over centuries. This is the first and most visually striking geological clue. To a trained eye, these patterns present a profound riddle. For the past 5,000 years, the dominant force shaping the Giza Plateau has been the wind, carrying abrasive grains of sand that scour horizontal lines into exposed rock. Wind erosion creates a very specific, sand-blasted texture. What we see on the Sphinx enclosure walls, however, is a completely different kind of signature. The deep, vertical fissures and flowing, scalloped contours are classic hallmarks of water erosion, specifically from heavy, sustained rainfall. One geologist, Dr. Robert Schoch, brought this contradiction into sharp focus. His analysis suggested that to create weathering of this depth and character, the Sphinx enclosure would have needed to endure not a few passing storms, but perhaps thousands of years of a much wetter climate. This single observation pulls our timeline back into a forgotten epoch. It points toward an era when the Sahara was not a desert, but a green savanna, a time of regular, torrential rains that could have slowly, patiently sculpted these vertical grooves. Suddenly, the official story of a 4,500-year-old monument begins to feel geographically incomplete. If the primary weathering agent was water, not wind, then the Sphinx must have been standing exposed, silently enduring the elements, long before the sands of the desert we know ever began to blow. This contrast in stone becomes undeniable when we place two images side by side. To truly test the rainfall hypothesis, we must leave the Sphinx enclosure and take a short walk across the Giza Plateau to the nearby tombs, the mastabas built for nobles and officials during the Old Kingdom. These structures are our control group, carved from the very same limestone bedrock and exposed to the exact same desert climate for the same 4,500 years. Their weathering tells a clear, consistent story. Look closely at the blocks of these tombs. You will see surfaces pitted by wind-blown sand, sharp corners still largely intact, and a flaking pattern known as exfoliation, where salt crystals form beneath the surface and pop off thin layers of stone. This is the classic signature of an arid environment, the slow, granular work of a dry wind over millennia. Now, return your gaze to the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. The difference is not just a matter of degree, it is a difference in kind. Where the tomb blocks are pitted and flaked, the Sphinx walls are deeply channeled and rounded. Where the tombs retain angularity, the Sphinx stone flows in soft, undulating hollows. This comparative geology is a powerful clue. It suggests the core body of the Sphinx did not simply weather for a longer period under the same dry conditions. It weathered under entirely different conditions. The morphology of the rock points to a separate climatic chapter, one of significant and persistent rainfall that acted upon the monument long before the current desert environment was established. This creates a compelling possibility that the Sphinx's origins may reach back into a pre-dynastic era, a time when the climate could sculpt stone in such a distinctive way, leaving a geological fingerprint that later structures simply do not possess. But the story does not end at the surface. The true depth of the Sphinx's mystery may be hidden in the very ground it rests upon. While the vertical channels on the enclosure walls tell a tale of rainfall, a different kind of investigation has peered into the darkness below. Using sophisticated seismic equipment, researchers have sent sound waves pulsing into the bedrock around and beneath the monument, listening for the echoes that reveal what lies within. The resulting profile, a kind of geological sonogram of the plateau, has detected intriguing anomalies. The data suggests that beneath the familiar contours, the limestone is not uniformly solid. There are pockets, areas of what appears to be extreme subsurface weathering, and hints of possible cavities or voids that do not correspond to any known tunnels or chambers from the dynastic era. These are not the neat, carved passageways of tomb builders, but rather irregular features that speak to natural processes acting over immense periods. One compelling interpretation is that these subsurface features are the legacy of groundwater. In a distant, wetter climatic phase, water would have percolated down through the porous limestone, dissolving and weakening the rock from within over thousands of years. This creates a profound possibility. The core mass of stone that would become the Sphinx may have already been deeply, internally weathered by these hydrological forces long before any human sculptor approached it with a copper chisel. The monument's history then becomes a layered narrative. First, nature acted upon the stone, shaping its internal structure with slow, chemical patience. Much later, a culture arrived and recognized a form within the rock, carving the leonine body and human visage we see today from a pre-conditioned mass. This transforms the Sphinx from a simple construction project into a collaboration across epochs, where human artistry gave final shape to a work that geology had already begun. The subsurface clues whisper of timelines that stretch far beyond our conventional frameworks, suggesting the statue is not merely old, but a product of two very different worlds in Earth's long history. The geological evidence points us toward a climate that feels almost mythical today. To understand the water-worn stones of Giza, we must journey back to a North Africa that would be utterly unrecognizable. The vast, sun-blasted Sahara Desert, the very symbol of aridity, was once a land of rolling grasslands dotted with lakes and crisscrossed by rivers. This was not a brief anomaly, but a sustained climatic chapter known to scientists as the Neolithic Subpluvial, or more poetically, the Green Sahara period. For several thousand years, ending roughly 5,000 years ago, the region was transformed. Regular monsoon rains swept across the landscape, supporting not just grass and shrubs, but elephants, giraffes, and human communities who lived as pastoralists alongside this thriving ecosystem. This paleoclimatic data is not speculative. It is firmly grounded in geological records, from ancient lakebed sediments to rock art depicting animals that could never survive in the desert today. This greener world provides the missing environmental key. The deep, vertical channels on the Sphinx enclosure are the exact type of erosion produced by persistent, heavy rainfall over centuries. If the core body of the monument was already present during this wet phase, standing as a natural limestone outcrop or perhaps as a partially shaped monolith, it would have been subjected to that relentless, sculpting rain. The weathering we see could have begun its work then, a slow, patient process that predates the pharaohs by millennia. This climatic context does more than just explain the erosion patterns, it reframes the entire mystery. It suggests the possibility that the Sphinx is not solely a product of dynastic Egypt's golden age, but perhaps a legacy monument, a sacred form inherited from a much earlier people who lived in a very different world. The stone remembers the rain, and that memory hints at a timeline stretching back into a forgotten epoch of human history. The weathered stone of the Sphinx presents a silent but profound challenge to the established timeline. This is where the investigation transforms from a curious anomaly into a fundamental intellectual conflict, a direct confrontation between two ways of seeing the past. On one side stands traditional Egyptology, a discipline built upon the meticulous study of human artifacts and records. Its dating of the Sphinx rests on a compelling chain of indirect evidence, linking the monument's style and location to the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. There are no inscriptions on the statue itself that name its builder, no buried foundation deposits with his cartouche. The attribution is a reasoned conclusion based on archaeological context, the alignment with his pyramid complex, and the artistic conventions of the Old Kingdom. It is history interpreted through the lens of human culture. On the other side stands the hard testimony of geology, which reads a different kind of record. Geologists are not looking for pharaohs or pottery styles, they are deciphering the physical language of the rock itself. Their analysis of the deep, vertical erosion points not to a specific ruler, but to a specific climate, one that vanished from Giza thousands of years before Khafre is said to have ruled. The weathering signature suggests the core body of the Sphinx was exposed to heavy rainfall for a prolonged period, a condition that last existed in that region between 7,000 and 10,000 years ago, a truly prehistoric epoch. This is not a minor discrepancy of a few centuries, it is a chasm of several millennia. The clash is not about which group of experts is right or wrong, but about how we weigh different forms of evidence. Can the cultural and historical framework, so rich in detail but reliant on interpretation, override the physical processes recorded in the stone, or does the material science of the rock itself demand that we reconsider the cultural narrative? This tension forces a bigger, more unsettling question. If the geology is correct, then who could have carved the Sphinx in that deep antiquity? The conventional story of human civilization describes a gradual ascent from simple farming communities to complex, state-level societies capable of monumental architecture. A Sphinx dating to 7,000 years before the Common Era would place it in a time traditionally viewed as preliterate and pre-urban, a time of scattered Neolithic settlements. The idea that a culture sophisticated enough to conceive, survey, and execute such a colossal and symbolically charged sculpture existed that long ago does not just push back a date. It challenges the very framework of how we understand cultural evolution. It suggests the possibility of a lost chapter, a precursor civilization or a cultural zenith that faded into legend long before the first dynasties of Egypt arose. This is the true weight of the geological clues. They ask us to hold two vastly different worlds in our minds at once and to consider which story the stones are truly trying to tell. Just a short walk from the weathered paws of the Sphinx lies another structure that may hold a crucial piece of this chronological puzzle. This is the Sphinx Temple and the nearby Valley Temple, low, massive buildings constructed from enormous limestone blocks, many still bearing their original polished granite casings. At first glance, they seem to perfectly anchor the Sphinx to the era of Pharaoh Khafre, classic examples of Old Kingdom craftsmanship. But a closer look at the very fabric of these temples introduces a fascinating complication. Many of the core limestone blocks within the walls display a familiar sight: deep, rounded hollows and vertical channeling that looks eerily similar to the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure walls themselves. This similarity is not a coincidence, it is a direct clue. A compelling theory proposed by some geologists and researchers is that these specific temple blocks were not cut fresh from a virgin quarry. Instead, they were sourced directly from the trench dug around the Sphinx. Imagine the scene: workers in Khafre's time are clearing the sand and debris from around this ancient, weathered monolith. As they cut back the bedrock to define the Sphinx's shape, they are left with piles of massive limestone blocks, each one already bearing the deep scars of water erosion from a bygone climatic era. Rather than discarding these weathered stones, the builders saw their value. They were already roughly shaped, immensely strong, and readily available. So they were hauled a short distance and incorporated into the foundations and core walls of the new temples, their scarred faces later hidden behind smooth, elegant granite sheathing. This idea of stone recycling is pivotal. It transforms our understanding of the construction sequence. If true, it means that the distinctive water weathering on the blocks happened before they were placed in Khafre's temples. The erosion, therefore, must date to a period prior to his reign. This turns the traditional narrative on its head. The temples may not commemorate the creation of the Sphinx, but rather its restoration, its rededication. In this light, Khafre is not the original builder, but a renovator, a pharaoh who encountered a mysterious, ancient, and heavily weathered guardian statue already sitting on the plateau. His great work was to clear it, repair it, perhaps recarve its features in his own likeness, and build magnificent new temples to honor it. This single architectural detail, the weathered stones in the temple walls, offers a potential resolution to the age discrepancy. It allows for the geological evidence of great antiquity to be true, while also acknowledging the clear archaeological links to the Old Kingdom. The Sphinx, then, becomes a palimpsest, a monument with two histories, one written in the deep time of geology, and another inscribed by the pharaohs who rediscovered it and made it their own. The story carved in stone is not a simple one to read. While the water erosion hypothesis paints a compelling picture of a green Sahara, the field of geology is built on debate and competing interpretations. Critics of this ancient timeline offer a different set of tools to explain the Sphinx's weathered form, focusing not on distant rainfall but on processes still at work on the plateau today. They point to the complex nature of the limestone itself. The Sphinx is carved from what geologists call Member 2 rock, a specific layer of the Giza Formation known for its varying hardness. Some bands within this stone are softer and more soluble than others, making them inherently susceptible to a variety of weathering agents. One prominent alternative points to salt. In the arid environment, groundwater can seep upward through the porous limestone through capillary action. As this moisture evaporates at the surface, it leaves behind crystallized salts, primarily halite, within the pores of the rock. These crystals grow, exerting immense pressure from within, and cause the outer layers of stone to flake off in a process called exfoliation or salt weathering. Over long periods, this repeated spalling could, some argue, create rounded hollows and contribute to the overall degradation we see. Another factor is wind, but not in the simple, sand-blasting sense. Critics suggest that when strong desert winds are laden with abrasive sand and dust, they can act like a fluid, swirling and scouring the softer layers of limestone in complex patterns. Combined with the natural tendency of the rock to weather in beds of differing resistance, this could potentially create undulating, flowing contours without requiring a single drop of ancient rain. These counter-arguments serve a vital scientific purpose. They emphasize that geomorphology, the study of how landscapes form, is rarely about a single dramatic cause. It is more often a slow symphony of multiple processes: water, wind, salt, and the inherent weakness of the stone itself, all playing out across millennia. The rounded features on the Sphinx could be the result of this intricate, ongoing performance rather than a relic from one specific climatic act. This perspective urges caution, reminding us that the allure of a lost civilization can sometimes lead us to favor the most extraordinary explanation. The true history of the monument may lie in a more nuanced, albeit less dramatic, interplay of forces that are still quietly at work, patiently reshaping the guardian of Giza grain by grain. Look up at the Great Sphinx and you will notice something strange. The human head, with its serene, regal features, seems almost delicate when compared to the sprawling, muscular body of the lion beneath it. The head is not just stylistically different, it is disproportionately smaller. It sits upon that vast, weathered torso like a carefully placed crown on a giant's shoulders, and it shows far less erosion. While the body is deeply channeled with those vertical grooves and rounded hollows, the head and the headdress, the nemes, display a sharper, more preserved profile. This visual mismatch is not an artistic error, it is a potential historical clue written in stone. It has led researchers to a provocative and compelling theory that the Sphinx we recognize is actually a composite monument, a fusion of two very different time periods. The idea begins with a simple observation. If the entire monument had been exposed to the same heavy rainfall that weathered the body so severely, then the original head, whatever shape it was, should show a comparable level of degradation. The fact that it does not suggests a dramatic intervention. Perhaps the original head, carved in that deep antiquity, was so badly damaged by millennia of rain that it became an unrecognizable, rounded lump of stone. Much later, during the time of the pharaohs, a ruler like Khafre encountered this ancient headless lion. Seeing the powerful symbolism in the weathered beast, he ordered a renovation. Stonemasons would have carefully resculpted the ruined mass at the front of the statue, carving it down into a smaller, human likeness, a portrait of the pharaoh himself to watch over the plateau. This would explain the scale discrepancy. The original neck and shoulders were already massive, so the new human head carved from that existing stone would naturally be smaller in proportion. It also explains the difference in weathering. The recarved surfaces are thousands of years younger than the body they now adorn. This theory transforms the Sphinx from a single, unified project into a historical palimpsest, a monument that has been edited and rewritten. The body tells one story of water and deep time, while the head tells another of royal renewal and dynastic pride. This duality makes the Sphinx far more fascinating. It becomes a dialogue between epochs, a silent guardian bearing the marks of two separate worlds on its single stony form. The stones are not the only ones that seem to remember a different past. Written records, though shrouded in their own layers of time, add a curious echo to the geological whispers. Among the many artifacts uncovered at Giza, one stands out for its startling claim. It is called the Inventory Stela, and it was discovered in the 19th century near the Great Pyramid. The text inscribed upon it presents a story that would have been familiar to any Egyptian priest of its era, yet it contains a detail that directly challenges the official timeline. The Stela describes how the pharaoh Khufu, the father of Khafre, discovered the great temple of the Sphinx already standing on the plateau. It states that the monument was already ancient and damaged, specifically citing that its head had been struck by a thunderbolt from the sky. Now, from a strict historical perspective, Egyptologists largely agree this stela was created much later, during the Ptolemaic period over 2,000 years after the time of Khufu. It is not a contemporary royal decree, but rather a kind of religious document, likely meant to establish the sacred pedigree of a local temple, so we cannot take its words as a factual, first-hand report. Yet the power of such a text lies not in its literal truth, but in the cultural memory it may preserve. Why would a scribe, centuries after the pyramids were built, invent a story that the Sphinx was already ancient in Khufu's time? This narrative suggests that even for the Egyptians of the later dynasties, the origins of the Sphinx were lost in a fog of deep time. It was not seen as a recent achievement of their direct ancestors, but as a relic from a primordial age, a monument they had inherited and were tasked with restoring. The mention of damage from a celestial thunderbolt is particularly evocative. It could be a mythological explanation for the very real, severe weathering on the statue's head and body, a way for a later culture to make sense of erosion patterns they could not explain. This transforms the stela from a historical document into a piece of folklore, a clue that the mystery of the Sphinx's age is not a modern invention. It was a question pondered in antiquity itself. Such sources remind us that history is often a story told by the victors, or in this case, the last ones to write it down. The physical evidence of water erosion and the folk memory of an ancient, damaged guardian begin to form a congruent, if shadowy, picture. They point toward a timeline where the Sphinx's true beginnings were so distant that even the pyramid-building pharaohs might have looked upon it with a sense of awe and mystery, wondering about the hands that first shaped the stone. Beneath the sun-baked surface of the plateau, a quieter, more persistent force is always at work. To understand the full story of the Sphinx's weathering, we must look down into the hidden hydrological life of the stone itself. The limestone bedrock of Giza is not a solid, impervious slab. It is porous like a petrified sponge. Deep below, the water table sits, a reservoir fed over millennia by the distant Nile. Through a process called capillary action, this groundwater is drawn silently upward through the microscopic pores and fissures in the rock, much like water climbing a paper towel. As this moisture travels, it dissolves soluble minerals within the limestone, subtly weakening its internal structure from the inside out. Then, when the moisture reaches the surface and evaporates under the desert sun, it leaves behind crystallized salts. These tiny crystals grow, exerting immense pressure from within the stone, and over time, they force the outer layers to crack and flake away in a process known as exfoliation. This cycle, repeated for thousands of years, can slowly round off sharp edges and contribute to the softening of contours. For many geologists, this ongoing, subsurface drama provides a complete explanation. They argue that over the course of 4,500 years, in an arid climate punctuated by periods when the Nile flooded and dramatically raised the local water table, this combination of capillary moisture and salt crystallization is more than sufficient to create the erosion patterns we see. It is a slow, patient, and relentless form of decay that requires no extraordinary climate shift, just the ordinary, grinding physics of a desert environment acting on vulnerable stone. This brings us to the heart of the scientific debate, a genuine disagreement over how to read the landscape. Are the deep, vertical channels on the Sphinx enclosure the unmistakable signature of torrential downpours from a forgotten green age, or are they the cumulative effect of this slow, internal sweating and crumbling, amplified by the natural layering of the rock? Both processes are geologically valid, but they point to vastly different timelines and stories. One suggests a dramatic, ancient origin in a wet world, the other a more conventional, if still impressive, antiquity within the dry world we know. This is not a conflict with a simple answer, but a fascinating tension at the intersection of history and earth science. The very stone from which the Sphinx was carved holds its own layered testimony. This is not a uniform block, but a stack of ancient seabeds, each with its own story and strength. The monument is hewn from what geologists call the Mokattam Formation, specifically its second and third members. The massive body, with its deeply weathered flanks, is carved from member 2 limestone, a rock that is noticeably softer, more layered, and riddled with fossil shells. Perched atop it, the head is fashioned from a cap of member 3 stone, a denser, more durable layer that resists erosion with greater tenacity. This simple geological fact is the key to deciphering the monument's appearance. The weathering we see is not random destruction. It is a meticulous dialogue between the environment and the stone's inherent weaknesses. When you examine the Sphinx enclosure, you notice the erosion carves deep, vertical grooves, but these grooves are not scattered arbitrarily. They follow the natural bedding planes of the member 2 limestone, exploiting the softer, more soluble bands between the harder layers. It is as if the weathering agent, whether water or wind, read the instruction manual written in the rock itself, systematically scouring out the vulnerable line. Proponents of the water erosion theory find this pattern highly significant. They argue that heavy, sustained rainfall would act exactly this way. Water does not attack stone evenly, it seeks the path of least resistance. During a downpour, runoff would cascade down the vertical walls, concentrating in the subtle depressions along the softer bedding planes. Over centuries, this focused flow would dissolve and carry away the weaker material, deepening those channels into the dramatic fissures we see today, while leaving the harder layers as protruding ribs. This creates the undulating, rounded profile that so distinguishes the Sphinx's body. To understand this stratigraphy is to hold the monument's geological diary. Each layer, from the soft, fossil-rich stone of the body to the hard, resilient cap of the head, recorded its own experience of time and climate. The differential weathering is a physical record, a direct imprint of environmental stress. The body stone tells a tale of prolonged, intense exposure, while the headstone speaks of better preservation, either due to its inherent hardness or, as some suggest, a much later recarving. Reading this diary layer by layer forces us to ask not just what weathered the Sphinx, but how the weathering interacted with the very fabric of the plateau. The rock story is one of vulnerability and resilience, written in the silent language of sediment and time. Deep beneath the sands of Giza, another structure echoes the story told by the weathered stone above. The Osiris shaft, a mysterious and complex subterranean network located near the Great Pyramid, descends through multiple levels into the bedrock. While its original purpose remains a topic of study, its physical state offers a powerful clue to the plateau's ancient environment. Inside the shaft, the walls bear a distinct horizontal waterline mark, a clear and undeniable indicator that this underground chamber was once completely flooded. The water rose to a significant height, saturating the limestone for what must have been a prolonged period. This is not a minor seepage, but evidence of a once dramatically higher groundwater table, a hidden sea within the rock itself. For geologists, this finding is crucial. It expands the possible erosive forces acting on the Sphinx from just rainfall from above to include sustained water pressure from below. If the water table was high enough to flood the Osiris shaft, it could very well have risen to submerge the lower portions of the Sphinx enclosure, the very base of the statue's paws and the trench walls. In such a scenario, the monument would not have just been rained upon, it could have been standing in a shallow, persistent lake. This changes the weathering model entirely. Standing water brings a different set of physical processes. There is the constant, gentle lapping of waves against the stone, a repetitive mechanical action that can wear away softer layers. More significantly, there is prolonged saturation where water penetrates deep into the porous limestone, dissolving its internal minerals and fundamentally weakening its structure from the inside out. This subsurface dissolution can cause the rock to become spongy and unstable, leading to large-scale flaking and collapse when the waters eventually recede. The Osiris shaft, therefore, provides a tangible benchmark for a past reality. It shows us that the conditions for severe water-based weathering were not only present in the form of skyward rain, but also as an upward push from the saturated earth. This aligns perfectly with the climatic picture of a green Sahara, a time of abundant rainfall that would have recharged the aquifers and lifted the water table to extraordinary levels. The possibility emerges of a sphinx partially mirrored in still water, its lower body subjected to a silent, patient, and immensely powerful force for centuries. This case study complicates the story in the best way, reminding us that the past environment was a dynamic system, where water moved through every part of the landscape, above and below, leaving its mark on everything it touched. The geological clues whisper of a timeline that stretches far beyond the pharaohs, into a world of green savannas and heavy rains. If we accept this possibility, even as a serious hypothesis, the implications for our understanding of human history become truly staggering. It suggests that the story of civilization as we commonly tell it, a steady upward climb from simple farming villages to complex kingdoms, might be missing a foundational chapter. A sphinx carved 7,000 or even 10,000 years ago would not be a product of dynastic Egypt, but of a culture flourishing in the Neolithic period, a time we traditionally associate with the first steps toward agriculture and settled life. This idea forces a monumental shift in perspective. It proposes that in the fertile Nile Valley, long before the first hieroglyph was etched or the first pharaoh unified the two lands, a society existed with the vision, the organizational skill, and the artistic sophistication to conceive and execute a work of such immense scale and symbolic power. They would have needed to survey the limestone plateau, plan the extraction of hundreds of thousands of tons of rock, mobilize a skilled workforce, and possess a shared cultural mythology powerful enough to justify creating a lion-human hybrid guardian. This does not require us to invent a mythical, sunken continent like Atlantis. Instead, it points toward a real but forgotten chapter of human cultural development right here in North Africa. It suggests that the human impulse toward monumental expression, toward permanently marking the landscape with meaning, has roots that run much deeper into prehistory than our current textbooks allow. We are asked to consider that the pyramids and temples of the Old Kingdom might not be the beginning of a story, but a magnificent renaissance, a rediscovery and elaboration upon artistic and spiritual traditions that were already ancient. This challenges a linear model of progress where technology and social complexity only move forward in one direction. It opens the door to a more cyclical understanding of history, where cultures can rise to great heights, fade from memory due to climatic shifts or other pressures, and have their legacy later inherited and built upon by newcomers. The weathered stones of Giza, therefore, ask us a profound question about resilience and memory. What other chapters of human achievement have been completely erased by time, leaving only the faintest of echoes in the geology of a place or the fragments of a myth? The Sphinx stands as a potential bridge to that lost world, a silent sentinel from an epoch when humanity's earliest dreams were already being carved in stone. This debate, rooted in the very stone of the plateau, now finds its way into the digital age. The question of whether rain or groundwater carved the Sphinx may finally be answered not with more argument, but with more data, gathered through the lens of 21st century technology. We are no longer limited to photographs and qualitative observations. Today, A technological renaissance in archaeology is bringing tools to Giza that can measure the monument's story in millimeters and wavelengths. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the Earth, revealing the hidden subsurface structure, mapping the very cavities and weaknesses that hint at ancient water tables. Meanwhile, high-resolution 3D photogrammetry and laser scanning, known as LiDAR, are creating a digital twin of the Sphinx of astonishing fidelity. These technologies work by capturing millions of precise data points from every surface, building a three-dimensional model where every crack, every hollow, and every undulation is recorded with scientific accuracy. This is far more than a simple digital replica. It is a new kind of historical document. For the first time, researchers can quantify the erosion. They can measure the exact depth and width of the vertical channels, analyze the angles of the rounded hollows, and create a topographic map of weathering across the entire statue. This precise data allows for something revolutionary: computer simulations. Scientists can now program these digital models with different environmental scenarios. They can simulate thousands of years of wind-driven sand abrasion, model the effects of capillary rise and salt crystallization, or recreate the flow patterns of sustained, heavy rainfall over the contours of the stone. Each simulation leaves a predicted pattern of wear, a digital fingerprint that can then be compared to the actual, scanned erosion of the Sphinx. The goal is to see which simulated process produces a pattern that most closely matches the real-world monument. This moves the discussion from a debate of interpretations toward a testable, quantitative science. It offers a path to potentially rule certain erosive forces in or out based on their physical impossibility to create the observed forms. While technology may not deliver a single, simple answer, it brings a powerful new objectivity, allowing the stone itself to speak in the precise language of data, guiding us closer to understanding the true age and story of the silent guardian. Yet for all its compelling logic, the water erosion hypothesis has not rewritten the history books. Within the halls of mainstream academia, it has met with significant and sustained skepticism. This resistance is not born of stubbornness, but from the rigorous, often painstaking standards of the scientific process itself. Critics, both Egyptologists and geologists, point to a fundamental gap in the argument: a lack of definitive, peer-reviewed publications that conclusively prove the erosion patterns on the Sphinx could only be the result of heavy rainfall, and that this rainfall must date to a period thousands of years before the Old Kingdom. The core issue is one of specificity. While the vertical channels are suggestive, opponents argue they are not diagnostic. They maintain that the combined effects of wind-driven abrasion, salt crystallization from groundwater, and the natural weathering of the limestone's variable layers could, over 4,500 years, produce remarkably similar features. Without a way to perfectly isolate and measure the contribution of each force, the extraordinary claim of a lost, wet epoch remains just that, an extraordinary claim. This academic landscape highlights a crucial truth about how knowledge evolves. Science operates on consensus, built brick by brick through evidence that can be tested, challenged, and independently verified. For a true paradigm shift to occur, the geological case must be presented in a way that withstands the most intense scrutiny. It must offer not just compelling observations, but testable, falsifiable predictions that other researchers can attempt to replicate or disprove. This process is inherently slow and cautious, and rightfully so. It protects our understanding of the past from being swept away by every intriguing new idea, no matter how captivating. This tension between a radical reinterpretation and established orthodoxy is not a flaw in the system. It is the system working as designed. It forces every piece of evidence, every weathering pattern, every seismic anomaly to prove its worth under the bright light of collective examination. The official timeline of the Sphinx remains unchanged not because the questions are ignored, but because the burden of proof for such a monumental revision of history is, and should be, exceptionally high. This standoff reminds us that some of humanity's greatest mysteries are not locked away in inaccessible tombs, but are debated openly in journals and conferences, where every claim is met with a demand for greater clarity. The story of the Sphinx, therefore, is also the story of how we decide what we know, and how new evidence must earn its place in our shared narrative of the past. The stones may argue over timelines, but the human imagination has always sought a deeper story. If we grant the possibility that the Sphinx predates the pharaohs, its meaning shifts profoundly, moving from a royal portrait to something far more archetypal. It ceases to be merely a statue and becomes a potential threshold, a sentinel standing guard at the very edge of recorded history, gazing back toward a world we have forgotten. This idea touches a nerve that runs through cultures across the globe, the persistent myth of a great age, a golden epoch that was lost to some immense cataclysm, whether flood or fire or ice. In this light, the Sphinx transforms. It is no longer just a symbol of one king's power, but a potential relic from that primordial time, a piece of wisdom carved in stone by hands from a distant chapter of the human story. This symbolic weight is immense. It suggests that civilization as a concept might not have a single, neat starting point, but rather pulses and cycles, with knowledge being lost, rediscovered, and reinterpreted across the millennia. The monument becomes a bridge, a tangible connection whispered about in legend, now possibly sitting in plain sight on the Giza Plateau. This perspective aligns it less with the precise, historical art of dynastic Egypt and more with the mysterious, megalithic markers found elsewhere in the world like Stonehenge or Göbekli Tepe. These sites often seem oriented not toward glorifying a specific ruler, but toward marking celestial events, geographical power points, or profound spiritual concepts from a deep, collective past. Could the Sphinx, in its original form, have served a similar purpose? Its precise eastward orientation has long been noted, its gaze fixed on the rising sun on the equinoxes. Some researchers have proposed that its leonine body might have been aligned with specific constellations, like Leo, as they appeared in the sky thousands of years earlier than the time of Khafre. Whether these alignments are deliberate or coincidental is part of the debate, but the very possibility feeds into this grander narrative. It invites us to see the Sphinx not as an isolated marvel, but as a potential participant in a global, prehistoric language of stone and sky. This layer of meaning, whether ultimately proven true or remaining in the realm of powerful symbolism, is key to understanding why this monument captivates us so completely. It speaks to a deep-seated human curiosity about our origins, about what was known before the first written word, about the resilience of memory across unimaginable stretches of time. The Sphinx, weathered and silent, holds that question in its stony form. It challenges us to wonder if the greatest achievements of our known history are actually magnificent restorations of a legacy far more ancient, a legacy whose full story is still waiting patiently to be deciphered from the rock. The idea of a monument from deep time no longer stands alone. Across the globe, other stones whisper a similar, disruptive story. In southeastern Turkey, on a windswept hill known as Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists uncovered a revelation that fundamentally rewrote the timeline of human achievement. Here, around 11,500 years ago, long before the invention of pottery or permanent agriculture, hunter-gatherer communities erected a breathtaking complex of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars. These megaliths, some weighing more than 15 tons, were arranged in precise circles and intricately carved with a menagerie of animals, foxes, snakes, boars, and birds, executed with a skill and symbolic depth that no one believed possible for that era. Göbekli Tepe is not a settlement. It appears to have been a ritual center, a place of gathering and profound spiritual expression from a time we once thought was defined by simple survival. Its existence is a monumental proof of concept. It demonstrates conclusively that the human drive to shape the landscape, to collaborate on a grand scale, and to encode meaning in stone emerged not as a product of established civilizations, but as a catalyst for them. This discovery provides a crucial new context for the Sphinx debate. It shows that sophisticated stoneworking and complex symbolic thought are not exclusive to the age of pyramids and pharaohs. They have roots stretching back into the very dawn of the Holocene, the period following the last ice age. When we look at the weathered body of the Sphinx and wonder if it could be a product of a much older culture, Göbekli Tepe stands as powerful evidence that such a feat was not only possible, but was already happening elsewhere in the world. It transforms the Sphinx from a potential isolated anomaly into a possible participant in a broader, poorly understood pattern. This pattern suggests a hidden chapter of human history, a period when disparate cultures, perhaps responding to the dramatic climatic shifts at the end of the Ice Age, independently turned to monumental architecture as a way to make sense of a changing world, to forge community identity, or to anchor their beliefs in the eternal solidity of stone. The great structures we attribute to the dawn of civilization may, in fact, be the magnificent second act of a story whose first pages are only now being unearthed. The story of the Sphinx is not only written in its original stone, but in the many hands that have reached across time to repair it, from the pharaohs of the New Kingdom to the Roman emperors, and into our modern era. This monument has never been left completely to the elements. Each generation that encountered the weathered giant felt compelled to intervene, to shore up its crumbling flanks and restore its dignity. These restoration campaigns, born of reverence and necessity, have themselves become layers of history, complicating the very investigation they sought to preserve. In ancient times, workers used stone blocks quarried from the plateau itself, fitting them carefully against the eroded body. In the 1980s and 90s, a major restoration employed thousands of new limestone blocks and significant amounts of modern cement to halt alarming deterioration. While these efforts undoubtedly saved the statue from further collapse, they also introduced a profound challenge for geologists and archaeologists. The new stones and mortar now cover vast sections of the original surface. They mask the very weathering profiles, the subtle contours and erosion patterns that hold the clues to the monument's environmental history. It is as if crucial pages of an ancient manuscript have been carefully glued back into the book, but with a modern adhesive that makes the original ink bleed and the paper texture impossible to study. A conservator today faces an almost paradoxical task. Their mission is to stabilize the structure for future generations, to protect it from modern pollution and the relentless pressure of tourists' footsteps. Yet every layer of protective coating, every supporting block placed against the historic stone, risks obscuring the evidence that could tell us when and how this entire story began. This creates a delicate ethical and scientific balance. How do you preserve a mystery without accidentally erasing the key to solving it? The tools of investigation have had to evolve in response. Non-invasive technologies like thermal imaging and 3D laser scanning have become invaluable, allowing researchers to peer beneath surface repairs or map the interface between original stone and restoration work without touching a single block. The Sphinx, therefore, stands as a living historical document in the truest sense. It is not a static relic frozen in a single moment, but a palimpsest that has been continuously edited and annotated for millennia. Each restoration is an entry in its margin, a note from a different era about what was valued and what was understood at that time. This ongoing interaction between decay and repair, between investigation and preservation, reminds us that our quest to understand deep time is always filtered through the practical needs of the present. The original text, written by Geology and the first sculptors, is still there, but it is now interwoven with the handwriting of every generation that followed, each trying to save the story for the next. The true weight of this mystery is not measured in years, but in what it asks us to reconsider about our own story. The debate over the Sphinx age is more than an academic dispute about erosion patterns. It is a quiet challenge to the very framework of how we understand time and human achievement. This monument, sitting silently at the crossroads of geology and archaeology, becomes a philosophical mirror. It reflects back to us the profound incompleteness of our historical record. We build our narratives of the past from what survives: the pottery shards, the stone inscriptions, the grand tombs that escaped the ravages of time and looters. But what about the cultures that built with wood in forested river valleys that later flooded? What about the societies whose greatest works were stories told aloud, or ceremonies held under open skies, leaving no permanent mark for us to find centuries later? The possibility that a work as colossal and sophisticated as the Sphinx could belong to a forgotten epoch forces a humbling admission. Our timeline of civilization is not a definitive map, but a sketch drawn from the fragments that happen to endure. The silent, weathered guardian of Giza asks us to consider how much of the human journey has simply faded from memory, erased by climate shifts, rising seas, or the simple, relentless turning of generations. This leads to a deeper question about the models we use to explain our own ascent. For over a century, the dominant story has been one of linear, progressive evolution. We describe humanity moving in a steady upward climb from simple hunter-gatherers to settled farmers to the builders of cities and states. It is a clean, logical narrative. But what if that model is too neat, too rigid to contain the full, messy, and cyclical truth of our history? Discoveries like Göbekli Tepe have already shattered the assumption that monumental architecture must follow agriculture. It shows that the human drive to create meaning on a grand scale can precede and perhaps even inspire settled life. The Sphinx, if its geological whispers are heeded, suggests this pattern may have repeated in the Nile Valley. It opens the door to a more complex vision of the past, one where cultural flowering is not a single, inevitable march forward, but a series of pulses. In this view, knowledge and ambition can rise to extraordinary heights, be lost or dispersed during periods of hardship or climatic change, and then be rediscovered and reimagined by later peoples. The pyramids would then not be a sudden, inexplicable beginning, but a magnificent renaissance, a rediscovery of scale and purpose by a culture that may have been building upon the faded legacy of their own forgotten predecessors. Ultimately, the Sphinx stands as a permanent question mark carved in limestone, a check against our own certainty. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but a living field of inquiry where new evidence can and should overturn old assumptions. This does not mean we abandon rigorous science or embrace every fringe theory. It means we cultivate intellectual humility. We must hold our current understanding lightly, ready to adjust the picture when a new piece of the puzzle is found, whether that piece is a seismic scan, a satellite image, or a fresh analysis of a weathering pattern everyone had seen but no one had truly questioned. The monument's enduring power lies in this duality. It is both an icon of a known, glorious civilization and a potential relic of an unknown one. It comfortably inhabits our world while quietly pointing toward a shadowy, deeper past. This tension is what makes it endlessly fascinating. It teaches us that the story of humanity is likely far more intricate, more ancient, and more surprising than any single textbook could ever contain. The Sphinx does not offer easy answers, but it asks the most profound questions, inviting us to look at the familiar stones of history and wonder what forgotten worlds might still be written upon them. Perhaps the most satisfying answer lies not in choosing one story over the other, but in weaving them together. the geological clues of deep water erosion and the archaeological ties to Khafre need not be mutually exclusive. In fact, when combined, they create a narrative far richer than either could tell alone, a story of a monument with not one birthday but two. Imagine the Giza Plateau not 4,500 years ago, but 8 or even 10,000 years in the past. The climate is wet, the landscape green. Over centuries, the seasonal monsoon rains fall upon a prominent natural outcrop of limestone, its layers of soft and hard stone already exposed by natural forces. The relentless downpours begin their patient work, scouring deep vertical channels along the softer beds, rounding the contours, slowly sculpting the bedrock into a distinctive, weathered form. This massive, lion-shaped protrusion would have stood for millennia as a silent feature of the landscape, a work of art authored entirely by climate and geology. Then, fast forward to the zenith of the Old Kingdom. The desert has reclaimed the land, and a new civilization at the peak of its architectural power arrives on the plateau. The priests and stoneworkers of Khafre look upon this ancient, eroded monolith with awe. They do not see a random rock formation, they recognize a divine silhouette. To them, it appears as a colossal, recumbent lion, a potent symbol of solar power and royal strength, seemingly placed there by the gods themselves. Their response is not to build from scratch, but to refine, to consecrate. They see the potential for a guardian. Teams of workers are set to clearing the accumulated sand and debris from around the natural form, defining the trench we see today. The most dramatic intervention happens at the front. The original pinnacle of stone, perhaps rounded and featureless from eons of rain, is carefully recarved. Stonemasons, using copper chisels and stone pounders, shape the hard member three-cap rock into a human face, likely in the likeness of their king, giving the natural lion a divine and royal countenance. They further define the paws, the tail, and the flanks, emphasizing the leonine shape that nature had already suggested. The weathered blocks removed from the enclosure are not wasted. They are hauled a short distance and incorporated into the foundations of the magnificent Sphinx and valley temples, their ancient scars hidden behind polished granite. This synthesis elegantly reconciles the evidence. It explains the severe, water-worn weathering on the body and enclosure walls, a process that required a much wetter, older climate. Simultaneously, it honors the clear archaeological and stylistic links to the Fourth Dynasty, explaining the sharper, more refined carving of the head and the associated temple structures. In this light, the Sphinx transforms from a static monument into a dynamic collaboration. It becomes a dialogue across time, where natural forces provided the raw canvas and an ancient civilization applied the finishing touches, recognizing sacred meaning in a shape that predated their own history. This multi-stage history does not diminish the achievement of the pharaohs, it deepens it. It suggests their genius was not only in creation, but in perception, in seeing the potential for a legacy monument and binding their own identity to the deep time of the land itself. The Sphinx, therefore, stands as a bridge between worlds, a testament to the enduring human impulse to find order in nature and to leave a mark that speaks across the ages. This captivating debate has long since escaped the quiet halls of academia. The riddle of the Sphinx's age has become a fixture of popular culture, amplified by countless television documentaries, best-selling books, and sprawling online discussions. This widespread fascination has undeniably fueled public interest in archaeology and even funded some legitimate research, bringing geological findings to a global audience. Yet, the media spotlight often carries a distorting effect. In the quest for compelling narratives, complex geological data can be streamlined into dramatic claims of lost civilizations or cataclysmic floods, sometimes overshadowing the nuanced, careful science at the heart of the investigation. This creates a curious cultural divide. On one side, academic researchers operate within a framework of peer review and evidential burden, where claims move slowly and cautiously. On the other, a captivated public, fed a diet of thrilling mysteries, often wonders why such a seemingly obvious idea that the erosion points to great antiquity is not instantly embraced by the establishment. This tension is not unique to the Sphinx, but it is particularly potent here at the site of one of the world's most iconic monuments. Navigating this landscape requires a critical, but not cynical, eye. It asks us to distinguish between evidence-based hypotheses, which welcome scrutiny, and pure speculative fiction, which often ignores contradictory data. We must learn to appreciate the genuine mystery without needing it to be proof of the fantastical. The very fact that this geological debate persists for decades, however, speaks to something deeper than ratings or book sales. It reveals the Sphinx's enduring power as a symbol. It proves that certain questions are so profound they transcend academic circles and tap directly into a collective human curiosity about our origins. We are drawn to the possibility of a forgotten epoch because it challenges the completeness of our story. The monument's silent, weathered presence seems to hold a secret, and whether that secret is climatic, historical, or purely symbolic, our desire to uncover it is a testament to the timeless allure of the unknown. This public captivation, in its best form, is not a hindrance to understanding but a valuable force. It ensures that the questions keep being asked, that new technologies are applied, and that the Sphinx remains not just a relic to visit, but a puzzle to solve, keeping the dialogue between our present and a deep, shadowy past forever alive. The final chapter of this story has not been written, for the investigation itself is an evolving science. Our path forward lies not in choosing a single theory, but in pursuing the hard, empirical data that can narrow the possibilities. One of the most promising frontiers involves a technique that reads the atomic diary of the stone itself. Imagine if we could ask the limestone of the Sphinx enclosure a simple question: when were you first exposed to the open sky? This is the potential of cosmogenic nuclide dating. When bedrock is buried, it is shielded from cosmic rays. The moment it is excavated or exposed, these high-energy particles from space begin to react with minerals in the stone, creating tiny, trace amounts of new elements, like specific isotopes of beryllium or aluminum. These isotopes accumulate at a known rate over time. By carefully extracting a core sample from the deeply weathered vertical channels and measuring the concentration of these cosmogenic nuclides, scientists could, in theory, determine how long that surface has been open to the atmosphere. A date of 4,500 years would strongly support the traditional timeline. A date significantly older, perhaps aligning with the end of the Green Sahara period, would provide powerful, direct evidence for the water erosion hypothesis. This kind of direct scientific dating remains a complex and delicate endeavor, but it represents a clear target for future research, a way to move the conversation from interpretation of erosion patterns to measurement of exposure time. Beneath our feet, the plateau may hold architectural secrets that could redefine the monument's purpose. Continued and more refined subsurface mapping is essential. The tantalizing anomalies detected by seismic surveys and ground-penetrating radar, those hints of cavities and irregular voids, demand further investigation with ever more sensitive tools. Are these simply natural fissures enlarged by ancient groundwater, or could they be intentionally carved spaces, perhaps even earlier construction phases now buried and forgotten? The discovery of a chamber or a cache of artifacts within the body or directly beneath the Sphinx would be transformative. It could provide direct cultural context, linking the monument definitively to a specific time and people. Each sweep of the radar, each new three-dimensional scan, brings us closer to knowing whether the Sphinx is solid to its core or if it contains a hidden architectural heart. Every unresolved detail of the monument is a doorway to a deeper mystery. The striking disproportion between the head and the body, for instance, is more than an artistic curiosity. It is a direct question about sequence and intent. Was the head recarved, and if so, from what original shape? Could advanced scanning detect subtle tool marks beneath the surface that differ from those on the body, revealing the ghost of an older visage? Similarly, the precise sequence of the erosion holds a climatic story. Did the vertical channels form first from heavy rain, followed by wind smoothing, or was it a more intertwined process? Detailed computer modeling of these processes, fed by exact measurements from laser scans, could simulate these timelines and compare the results to the real monument in a virtual laboratory. Even the composition of the stone itself offers clues. A meticulous analysis of the salts within the limestone pores could help distinguish between minerals deposited by occasional capillary rise and those that might be left by long-term standing water. The Sphinx, in its majestic silence, continues to be the ultimate guardian of its own origin story. It challenges us not with refusal, but with patience, knowing that our tools and our questions must mature to meet its age. With each technological leap, from satellite archaeology to atomic-scale analysis, we gain a new vocabulary with which to interrogate the stone. We are no longer just observers of its form, we are becoming readers of its material memory. This journey reminds us that some of humanity's greatest mysteries are not locked away in inaccessible places, but sit in plain sight, waiting for the day when our curiosity finally asks the right question in a language the stones can understand. The story is still being uncovered, word by weathered word. The Great Sphinx sits at the heart of a magnificent contradiction, its body telling a story its face was meant to silence. The geological clues we have walked through present a fascinating and unresolved puzzle, one that gently chips away at the comfortable certainties of our history books. From the deep vertical weathering channels that speak of forgotten rains to the stark contrast with the wind-worn tombs of the Old Kingdom, the evidence invites us to consider a timeline that stretches far back into a greener, wetter Sahara. This is not a call to discard one story for another, but to hold a more complex possibility. Whether you find the water erosion hypothesis completely compelling or lean toward explanations of salt and wind, the very existence of this debate enriches our understanding. It reminds us that history is not a closed book with a final chapter, but an ongoing investigation, a conversation between the stones we find and the stories we tell about them. The Sphinx endures not merely as a statue of a pharaoh, but as a profound question carved in limestone. It challenges us to keep exploring, to keep questioning, and to never stop marveling at the hidden depths of our shared human past. As our tools grow sharper and our curiosity remains undimmed, we must wonder what other secrets, patiently waiting beneath the surface, the relentless sands of time might yet reveal.